Detectives are holding a physical skeleton key that theoretically should have closed this investigation on the very first day. The 65-day mark now serves as the heavy, motionless center of the Nancy Guthrie disappearance. 65 days since she vanished and 65 days since a lens captured what authorities classify as a carefully staged departure. The most critical evidence remains mute. Unidentified foreign DNA recovered from deep inside her private Tucson residence. We are stripping away the repetitive news recaps to interrogate the hard, clinical forensic science. Federal investigators confirmed that biological material recovered in Guthrie's home does not belong to the victim herself. It failed to match her inner circle and yielded 0 results within the 20 million profiles in the national database. Yet, 0 arrests have been made, no names have been released, and not one suspect is in police custody. Why has the most definitive forensic link in this entire case failed to produce a viable suspect? That evidence remains isolated in a federal laboratory 65 days deep without yielding a single name. We are addressing that tonight with a specialist who has utilized this exact science to close over 300 cold cases. Parabon Nanolabs' genetic genealogist CeCe Moore provided the most surgical and detailed breakdown of this forensic deadlock yet. Her direct analysis suggests that the revelation at the end of this report will fundamentally shift your entire perspective on this case. This is no failure of local policing. It is a brutal, scientific wall that defines exactly where this hunt stands. 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie, mother of journalist Savannah Guthrie, vanished in February 2026 from her Tucson home. A routine wellness check rapidly evolved into a massive, high-stakes criminal probe unlike any standard missing person search. The response is federal, with multiple agencies burning through resources that imply they know the exact threat they are facing. Pima County authorities confirmed the discovery of foreign genetic material within the walls of the Guthrie home. It belongs neither to her nor her family, and it is entirely absent from the national database. The department refuses to specify where the sample was found or the exact volume of biological material recovered. This tactical silence is deliberate. When police talk, they want leads. When they stay quiet, they are protecting a trail. Sheriff Chris Nanos faces intense, mounting pressure regarding the specific handling of this high-profile investigation. We have previously exposed the inconsistencies in his statements and the early blunders regarding physical evidence handling. We are ignoring those debates tonight to focus exclusively on the hard, cold, forensic reality. The evidence exists and is being processed, yet the clock moves with an agonizing and calculated slowness. The delay is buried in a single precise word that changes the entire trajectory: complicated. Ashley Banfield's podcast has been citing high-level, off-the-record law enforcement sources near the Guthrie case. These insiders categorize the biological evidence found inside the residence as being uniquely and frustratingly complicated. CeCe Moore explains that this specific term dictates what that DNA sample actually represents. When no match appeared in the system, many assumed the trail died. That assumption is fundamentally wrong. To grasp why, you must understand the mechanical limits of the national system known as CODIS. It is a federal system housing 20 million profiles belonging specifically to convicted violent offenders. Matches occur within mere hours if the perpetrator is already registered in the national system. However, this system only catalogs those with prior, specific arrests, ignoring the general, law-abiding public. It lacks profiles for those who avoid detection or use private sites like 23andMe. A failure to match signals 2 distinct and difficult possibilities to an investigator. Either the perpetrator possesses no prior criminal history, or the biological sample is a forensic nightmare, a complex mixture. A complex mixture is a laboratory disaster containing stacked layers of DNA on one single surface. Police hold the suspect's genetic signature, but it remains invisible to the very science meant to isolate it. Buried in the chaotic samples is a biological ghost representing just 10% of the recovered material. This microscopic fragment is the only priority, yet it remains locked behind a daunting scientific barricade. Investigators are currently fighting a biological sample containing the genetic blueprints of multiple people on one swab. This occurs because every surface, from light switches to handrails, acts as a repository for human biological debris. These everyday surfaces maintain a permanent, invisible log of every human being who has ever touched them. Laboratories are generally proficient at untangling 2-person mixtures with clinical ease using automated protocols. However, the evidence recovered from Nancy Guthrie's residence is no routine sample. According to forensic insiders, detectives are facing a volatile genetic cocktail of 3 or more distinct contributors. Within this biological wreckage, the killer's profile likely represents a mere 10% of the total material. This leaves the forensic team struggling to isolate a single, identifying thread from a sea of genetic noise. If forensic experts report a measly 10% contribution or detect 4 nameless males at 5% each, it is useless. That is statistically dead air. Observe what this means in practical, brutal terms for this specific homicide investigation. For every 10 microscopic units of genetic data in that sample, 9 belong to people who were there legally. You have Nancy, her family, caregivers, and contractors, while only 1 single unit belongs to the uninvited intruder. Isolating that one rogue strand from the deafening biological noise is the most brutal test in modern forensic science. Yet, finding him is merely the first gate. A second, lethal layer of complexity lurks behind identifying the suspect. The true nightmare is not just naming him, but pulling a high-definition profile from a contaminated, messy mixture. They must construct the ultra-precise genetic map required for a deep-dive genealogy search, or the trail ends forever. These are 2 distinct scientific mountains to climb. Can the one person who knows this tech best navigate them? Her name is CeCe Moore. In this shadowy corner of law enforcement, she carries more clinical weight than anyone. As the lead genealogist at Parabon Nanolabs, Moore spearheads the most prominent forensic agency in the United States. If you have monitored any major homicide case over the last 5 years, her work has likely been involved. She is responsible for shattering more than 300 cold cases that previously had 0 viable suspects or leads. Moore forced answers from evidence lockers where skeletons gathered dust for decades by weaponizing advanced new genealogy techniques. She remains the apex authority in forensic genealogy. She spoke to TMZ directly about the Nancy Guthrie murder investigation. Her assessment was a cold, calculated deviation from the optimistic theories the public had been desperate to believe. The impact is not just in her data, but in the reality that she chose to speak out at all. CeCe Moore does not trade in rumors or active case speculation unless the scientific foundation is absolutely ironclad. When she clarifies why the DNA has not yielded a name, she is describing a concrete wall she knows intimately. The biological material from Nancy's residence is a complex mixture, and that single word complex is where the hunt dies. When the mission is genetic genealogy rather than a basic DNA comparison, the entire scientific foundation shifts underfoot. The evidence points to a complex mixture. That implies more than 2 people, likely multiple unidentified predators involved. This sounds like a complex mixture, meaning more than 2 individuals and likely more than 2 unidentified males. Conventional forensic tools used for federal database matches rely on what technicians call short tandem repeat profiles. These standardized genetic markers act as a basic biological fingerprint for the FBI's national database system. Labs have mastered the art of untangling these mixtures over 30 years of repetitive, high-stakes refinement. Even in the filthiest samples, a technician can usually pull an STR profile from a minor contributor for a search. Genetic genealogy operates on a different plane entirely, utilizing what are known as single nucleotide polymorphisms. An SNP profile demands hundreds of thousands of distinct genetic markers harvested from the suspect's entire genome. It creates a dense, terrifyingly accurate genetic blueprint, and that specific data volume is what makes genealogy possible. Uploading an SNP profile to a public database is more than a search. It is an interrogation of history. It commands the software to find every living relative who shares massive swaths of that specific, lethal code. The system maps out siblings, cousins, and parents to construct a family tree that points back to the killer. But here is the devastating reality Moore is presenting to the world. The tools to separate these profiles don't exist. The mathematical algorithms required to isolate a minor contributor for genealogy simply have not been programmed yet. The technology needed to harvest a clean SNP profile from a 10% contributor is currently science fiction. This massive scientific chasm is the primary roadblock stopping the entire investigation from moving toward an arrest. How deep does this technical failure go? To grasp the truth, we must examine the precision the public ignores. When forensic teams assemble a profile for genealogy, they utilize microarray analysis or low-pass whole genome sequencing. Together, these systems generate a genetic ledger containing millions of individual DNA markers where our unique differences are recorded. These massive data files are what investigators actually feed into the vast, consumer-driven genetic databases. Can a single whispered voice be heard in a screaming crowd? That is the signal-to-noise ratio problem. Investigators upload these massive data files to consumer databases. Can they hear a single suspect's voice in a crowd? The primary obstacle with tangled DNA samples is the suffocating signal-to-noise ratio. Try to isolate one lone violin playing. That lone violin is the killer's physical essence, buried in an orchestra where 9 other instruments are screaming louder. The evidence is trapped in a room, buried in acoustic noise. Every vibration exists, but isolating these specific frequencies remains a struggle. That melody is an engineering barrier. We wonder if the suspect's voice is actually audible within this mess. Forensic labs rely on probabilistic genotyping systems, specifically software like TrueAllele and STR-Mix. These algorithms dissect complex mixtures to calculate if specific markers belong to a minor, hidden contributor. These digital tools have survived courtrooms nationwide, securing convictions where human interpretation failed to see the truth. However, these systems focus on small markers, not the massive genome-wide data required for modern genealogy. Once the search reaches the single nucleotide level, identifying an individual becomes exponentially more difficult for investigators. The reality is grimmer. When labs pull data from contaminated mixtures, they get a distorted, overlapping signal. Every genomic point shows a blend of everyone involved. If a suspect has one unique genetic variant, but a more visible contributor has a different one, the dominant signal can totally bury the suspect's evidence. You get a profile too dirty to trust or upload. How do we find them under these conditions? Public genealogy databases refuse to process anything that is not a pristine, dual-stranded genetic profile. Any data harvested from a mixture hits a quality wall and fails. This is no FBI mistake. It is a technological void because our current instruments were never designed for this highly specific puzzle. Standard forensics and genetic genealogy evolved in separate worlds, solving 2 entirely different sets of problems. Applying genealogy to filthy forensic samples is the absolute bleeding edge of this unstable scientific frontier. By definition, that bleeding edge has not arrived for the general public. Or has it already? Moore's description exposes a technical fortification that the global scientific community is trying to dismantle right now. This case is not unique for its DNA. It is unique due to immense public pressure. Massive resources are force-marching the development of high-speed, experimental software at an unprecedented, frantic pace. We are entering a phase where technical details become dense, requiring precision regarding our intelligence sources. Moore told TMZ that her internal contacts confirmed engineers are currently building a new digital framework. They are doing this specifically for Nancy Guthrie. She pinpointed a firm called Astria as the catalyst. It is convolution software, perhaps from the company Astria. I recently heard that revolutionary equipment is slated for release in approximately 1 year from now. That tech will help bridge this gap. Understand, Moore is relaying intelligence from her deep cover insiders. This is a single-source report. We have not independently verified the Astria link. We attribute this directly to Moore's formal statement, but her description of the software hunt, specialized code that scrubs mixed samples for genealogy matches, exactly what researchers have chased for years. The chasm between mixture profiling and genealogy-grade data is a notorious roadblock in scientific journals. Multiple private and government teams are currently racing to find a viable solution to this impasse. Moore gave that massive effort a name and a deadline. A specific case created this urgency. If her intelligence is accurate, the Guthrie investigation is not just using existing technical tools, it is forcing the world to build them. Consider how rare that truly is. An 84-year-old vanishes in Tucson, and the scientific demand is so high that companies are scrambling. They are rushing to invent tech not even for sale. This case did not just happen. Public demand pushed it there. Moore's projected timeline for this software is months, perhaps a year. This is not a film where a program installs and a killer is caught by Tuesday. But the foundation is finally being poured, paving a direct path that leads to the truth. This redefines our perception. The narrative that this investigation has stalled is a complete fabrication. We are witnessing a race between a biological secret and a field desperate to forge the key. No key does not mean a broken lock. It means the timeline belongs to the engineers. Regarding the FBI genealogy unit, the Bureau does not officially have one. They are more organized. 50 million people have unwittingly transformed their families into a digital dragnet for federal investigators. One scientific breakthrough will activate this map to find a killer who he never sat for a swab. There is a lethal catch. This federal initiative weaponizes the cold science of genealogy, aiming it like a scalpel at high-stakes federal manhunts and the nameless dead. The Bureau is taking the consumer-grade matching technology, CeCe Moore, refined for hobbyists, and hard-coding it into a lethal federal law enforcement apparatus. Moore confirmed to the press that an elite FBI genealogy unit is currently mobilized, prepared to grind through the data 24/7 the second a suspect's profile hits the screen. The Bureau is fully operational, waiting on the trigger. Once that viable single nucleotide polymorphism profile is locked in, the lights in that federal lab won't go out. This is a targeted tactical strike, not a hopeful guess. We are looking at peak operational readiness, a specialized unit with the technical firepower, the clear institutional mandate, and the necessary legal clearance. They are coiled, waiting for the lab to deliver the digital blueprint for what comes next. But there is a firewall. The FBI cannot simply pillage every consumer DNA database at will, a nuance frequently ignored in the heat of public debate. Giants like 23andMe and Ancestry.com operate under strict internal protocols and proprietary data governance frameworks that explicitly shut the door on federal agents. Only platforms like GED Match and Family Tree DNA currently serve as the primary gateways where law enforcement can upload samples under highly specific, regulated conditions. Federal investigators have operated under the heavy hand of Department of Justice interim guidelines since 2020. These mandates force federal agencies to follow a rigid path. First, they can only deploy these genetic tools for homicides, sexual assaults, or the unidentified dead. Second, they must secure high-level supervisory sign-off. Third, every lead must be meticulously logged and tracked. And fourth, they are restricted to databases with transparent, pre-established law enforcement access policies. Does the Nancy Guthrie case fit the criteria? Absolutely. This is a brutal homicide investigation that clears every high bar requirement for federal intervention. The only missing piece is the SNP profile, the raw data input that the entire downstream manhunt demands. Right now, the investigation is choked by a single scientific bottleneck. It isn't a lack of will or legal authority. It's a matter of biological extraction. Who is holding the key? Imagine an FBI task force, fully trained and authorized, vibrating with readiness within a legal cage that finally allows them to strike. We are looking at a digital ecosystem of tens of millions of human profiles just waiting for the right match, while a killer's genetic code remains trapped in a contaminated biological mixture in a federal laboratory. They are waiting for a computational breakthrough that might be weeks or even months away. This is the cold reality of the investigation as it stands today, but consider the moment that lab work finally concludes. When that digital key is finally turned, everything changes. The insights CeCe Moore shared with the media represent the most critical updates we have seen in this hunt for over a month. The looming reveal is staggering. 50 million profiles. Let that number sink in. 50 million. Moore cited that massive figure during her briefing. To illustrate the sheer magnitude of the net investigators will cast once that profile is extracted. When a clean sample is finally isolated from the evidence found in Nancy Guthrie's home, the search field expands to a terrifying scale. Even though 50 million people have handed over their genetic blueprints to private corporations, the three industry titans have slammed the door, forbidding law enforcement from searching their vaults. Yet, 50 million profiles remain out there in the private sphere. Ordinary people mailed away their saliva to uncover their heritage or find a long-lost sibling. They were looking for genetic health risks or a connection to their past. Not a single one of them signed up to act as a federal informant. Most have no clue that, under the right legal stars, their private family ties can be weaponized to hunt down a killer who never stepped foot in a lab. This data exposes a ghost, someone who never once submitted their own code. How does a stranger find a murderer? This is the core engine of investigative genetic genealogy, a process the public rarely views with enough clinical precision. When the feds upload a killer's profile to these databases, they aren't searching for the man himself. They are hunting for his bloodline, the unsuspecting relatives who share significant, telltale strands of DNA with the Phantom. They're looking for his parents, his siblings, his aunts, his uncles, or even a distant first cousin. Even a fifth cousin 5 times removed becomes a glowing beacon if they share enough shared genetic markers. No relative is invisible. Once a match is confirmed, a forensic genealogist like Moore meticulously constructs a sprawling family tree branching out from every lead. They calculate the exact point of origin, the common ancestor shared by the match and the killer. The objective is to isolate that shared ancestor and then reverse engineer the lineage, tracing every single descendant of that bloodline who matches the specific age and biological profile of their target. These names are then cross-referenced against local geography. The Golden State Killer's decades of evasion ended in 2018 when a distant cousin's genetic data on GED match finally narrowed the list. Joseph James D'Angelo inhabited the shadows for 40 years until his own family tree provided the ultimate, involuntary, and crushing genetic betrayal. Somewhere right now, a predator is nestled in a public database, invisible to the law because of a singular, confounding biological glitch. Unsuspecting family members essentially provided the precise coordinates to a killer's front door by simply sharing their own genetic code online. CeCe Moore informed TMZ that a solitary, pristine SNP profile will finally trigger a massive federal sweep of every major consumer genetic database across the entire American landscape. The second those legal warrants are executed, the suspect's true identity will surface in mere minutes, not months, or even years. This entire operation hinges on securing a viable SNP profile that can be weaponized within global genetic genealogy networks for the match. I anticipate federal warrants being slammed onto corporate desks to force a resolution far sooner than any traditional detective work could achieve. The identification timeline will collapse instantly, shifting from the agony of years to a matter of hours or even mere minutes. That razor-thin window is only minutes to days wide, representing the culmination of every search and forensic resource currently deployed in Tucson. Detectives on the ground and tip-line operators are suspended in this silence, waiting for one specific scientific breakthrough to change everything. Analysts must isolate one clean SNP profile from the degraded, unreadable biological mixture recovered at the primary crime scene for processing. This moment represents the brutal chasm between 65 days of agonizing silence and an identification faster than a routine passport application process. The digital traps are set, the expert teams are active, and the consumer databases are already saturated with millions of profiles. The legal cage is already built and waiting. We are simply lacking the biological key required to turn the heavy deadbolt. We must pause the narrative here, as an active investigation rarely permits the luxury of a clean or final resolution. What remains is total transparency regarding the status of the case and the mechanical realities required to move the needle forward. The genetic material recovered from Nancy Guthrie's residence is tangible, verified, and currently held under tight, climate-controlled federal security. The absence of a suspect in handcuffs reflects a technical boundary in the lab, not a failure of the investigators on site. Science has collided with a wall, a unique, complex configuration of genetic data that has never been encountered in this exact form. Technicians are currently dissecting a complex mixture where the killer's minor genetic signature represents a mere 10% of the total sample. By attaching her professional reputation to this explanation, CeCe Moore is handing this grieving community a dose of cold, clinical reality. She is exposing the technical why behind the delay, explaining exactly why 65 days have elapsed without a suspect in irons. Moore clarified why the evidence remains stagnant while the case is stalled, and why the ultimate resolution will arrive with violent, impossible speed. Within the coming weeks, we will observe if the software development timeline for the new STR tools begins to tighten around the target. We are monitoring other forensic results that might emerge from the laboratory before the new digital tools are even finished being built. Lead investigators could be pursuing parallel evidentiary threads that might shatter the case on a completely different and more traditional timeline. While DNA is the most scrutinized piece of evidence in the media, it certainly does not tell the entire story of this investigation. Nancy Guthrie vanished into a total and terrifying void, leaving behind a heavy silence that no amount of verified evidence has yet filled. Investigators are currently hunting ghosts, relentlessly sifting through every single lead to find exactly where the trail for Nancy Guthrie went cold. Nancy Guthrie has been gone for 65 days, and the biological clock is finally ticking toward the cold, hard revelation of a name. Cold ink in public archives and named witnesses provide the only skeletal remains of the afternoon Nancy Guthrie disappeared. Official files list 0 suspects, a clinical absence of guilt in a case defined by emptiness. The internal logic of the facts suggests a calculated sequence of events that were neither accidental nor entirely random. Lone accounts are treated as outliers until hard evidence confirms the claims. This inquiry is restricted to the known, avoiding toxic speculation to preserve the clinical truth of this specific case. The Pima County Sheriff waits at 520-351-49 while others reach out for 988 in the dark.